On Christmas Eve, my daughter-in-law looked across the dinner table I had set with my own hands and told me, in front of my grandchildren, that the best gift I could ever give this family was to disappear. So I did. I withdrew my co-signature from their business loan, removed my name from every financial arrangement they had built on my back, and booked a flight to Kyoto, Japan. What I left inside a wrapped Christmas box on the kitchen counter didn't just shake them, it dismantled everything they thought they owned. Before I tell you how we got there, I need you to understand something. I am not a man who gives up easily. I spent 34 years as a structural engineer, the kind of work where one miscalculation brings a building down. I know how to hold things together. I know how to carry weight that other men walk away from. I carried it for so long that I stopped noticing it had become the only thing I did. My name is Daniel Marsh. I am 67 years old. I lived in a 4-bedroom colonial in Eugene, Oregon, that my wife Carol and I bought in 1991, the year our son Nathan started 2nd grade, and believed, with complete sincerity, that I could fix anything I could. Back then, I fixed bikes and science projects and hurt feelings and every broken thing that landed in my driveway. Carol used to say I was the kind of man the world didn't make enough of anymore. She said it with that particular smile she had, the one that started at the left corner of her mouth before it reached her eyes. I can still see it perfectly. I have had to memorize it because she has been gone for 6 years now, and memory is the only place she still lives. Carol died in February of the year Nathan married Serena. Heart failure, sudden and complete, the way some things end without giving you a chance to prepare. I was 61 years old and I became a widower in the space of one Tuesday morning, and I did what I always did. I held things together. I planned the funeral. I called the relatives. I sat with Nathan while he cried and told him his mother would want us to keep going, even though I wasn't entirely sure that was true, because I was the one who had to fall apart alone at 3 in the morning when the house was finally quiet. Nathan married Serena 14 months after Carol died. I liked Serena at first. She was sharp, ambitious, the kind of woman who entered a room and immediately understood its geometry. She ran a small interior design business out of Portland, and Nathan worked in commercial real estate, and they seemed to fit together the way certain materials bond under pressure. I was glad he had found someone. I told myself that. They moved into my house 8 months after the wedding. It was supposed to be temporary. Serena's lease had ended, and they were between places, and the house was large enough, and I was alone in it, and temporary seemed reasonable. Nathan came to me with the careful voice he used when he wanted something significant. "Dad, just for a few months. Just until we get our footing." I said yes because he was my son, and because the house was very quiet without Carol, and because I still believed, foolishly, that family was the answer to loneliness rather than sometimes its source. That was 4 years ago. In 4 years, temporary had calcified into permanent. Lily was 13 when they moved in, and she was 17 now. Marcus had been 9, and now he was 13, and nearly as tall as I was, and wore the same bewildered expression his father had worn at that age. I loved those children in a way I couldn't fully articulate, the same way you love something that reminds you of a person you've lost. Lily had Carol's patience. Marcus had her laugh. They were the best argument for staying I had. 2 years into the arrangement, Serena came to me about the business loan. She was expanding her design firm. She had clients in Portland, in Seattle, a contract with a hotel group that needed interior work across 3 properties. She needed capital. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with printed spreadsheets and a business plan that was genuinely impressive, and she explained that she needed a co-signer because her own credit history had a gap from a bankruptcy 8 years earlier, and Nathan's income alone wasn't sufficient collateral. I sat with the documents for a week. I called my attorney, a man named Frank Holloway, who had handled my estate planning and who had the useful quality of telling me exactly what he thought, without softening it. Frank said the loan was risky but not unreasonable given the business plan. He said co-signing meant I was fully liable if she defaulted. He said I should think carefully. I signed. I signed because Nathan sat across from me the night before and said, "Dad, this is the thing that gets us out. This is what lets us buy our own place. Once the business is profitable, we move out, we pay you back, and you get your house back." I believed him because I had always believed him. He was my son. Believing him was the closest thing I had left to believing in anything. The business did well. Not extraordinarily, but steadily. Serena hired 2 assistants. She landed a residential contract with a development company building luxury condos along the waterfront. By the 3rd year, the loan was being serviced without my involvement. Nobody mentioned moving out. I stopped asking directly. I had learned by then that asking directly created a particular tension in the household, a quality of silence that would last for days and make Lily look worried at dinner. So I found ways to raise the subject gently, and Nathan would nod and say soon, and Serena would look at the far wall with an expression I had started to recognize as controlled impatience. The thing you need to understand about being taken for granted is that it doesn't announce itself. It arrives slowly, the way dampness gets into a foundation. You don't notice the first sign, or the second. You rationalize. You adjust. You find reasons why the small diminishments are actually reasonable, why the way she spoke to you at breakfast was stress rather than contempt, why Nathan's refusal to engage when she dismissed you was consideration rather than cowardice. You do this because the alternative, accepting that your own child had stopped seeing you as a person, is a thing you are not ready to hold. Christmas Eve arrived the way it always had in that house, with cold coming through the window seams and the smell of pine from the wreath I'd hung on the front door, the same hook where Carol had hung her wreath every December for 20 years. I had spent 2 days preparing. I'd made the prime rib roast that was our family's tradition, the one Carol had taught me in our first December together, standing in a kitchen so small we kept bumping elbows. I'd made her apple pie, working from the handwritten index card she'd kept in the recipe box I still used. I'd set the table with the good dishes, the cream-colored ones with the blue border that we'd received as a wedding gift, and saved for occasions that deserved them. I had also wrapped a Christmas gift for the family. A business gift, really. I'd learned that Serena's hotel contract was facing a financing gap. One of the property investors had pulled out, and that she needed a short-term bridge while a replacement was found. I had decided, sitting in my study 3 nights earlier with the lamp on and the house quiet, that I would offer to cover the gap. $60,000 from my retirement savings. Not a loan, a gift. A gesture that said, I believe in this family. I am still here. I am not a burden. I am a foundation. The envelope was inside a box wrapped in green paper with a silver bow. I had put it at Serena's place setting. Dinner started well. Lily helped me carry dishes from the kitchen and told me about her AP history paper with the particular intensity she brought to things she cared about. Marcus ate his weight in rolls and explained, at length, a video game whose mechanics I did not fully follow but whose enthusiasm I could appreciate. Nathan poured the wine and caught my eye across the table and smiled, and for a moment it felt the way it used to feel, the way I had believed it could still feel. The 4 of us around a table that had held so much history. Serena was quiet during most of the meal. She had been under pressure, I knew. The contract situation was stressful. I understood stress. I had carried it professionally for 3 decades. I gave her the space. After dinner, after the pie, I suggested we open the family gifts. I nodded toward the box at Serena's seat. That one's for you and Nathan. For the business situation. She picked it up, shook it slightly, looked at Nathan. He gave a small, encouraging nod. She pulled the ribbon loose, lifted the lid, took out the envelope, opened it. Read the letter inside. I had written it carefully. 2 drafts, explaining the amount and the intent, and that I ask for nothing in return except that they find their footing. She set it down on the table. She looked at me, and the expression on her face was not gratitude. It wasn't even neutrality. It was something colder, and I watched it take shape the way you watch weather change through a window, knowing you are about to lose whatever you'd hoped for from the day. You know what would actually help? Her voice was even controlled, like she had rehearsed this or perhaps had been waiting for a moment that had the gravity to hold it. What would actually help this family is if you weren't here. I thought I had misheard her. I had a moment, a full, complete moment where I was certain I had misunderstood. I looked at Nathan. He was looking at the tablecloth. Serena continued, You're in every room of this house. You leave your coffee cup on my design sketches. You rearrange things in the kitchen and don't tell me. You sit in the living room when I'm trying to take calls for work. I can't breathe here, Daniel. I can't work. I can't think. I can't be married in a house where my father-in-law is watching everything all the time. She paused. The best Christmas gift you could give this family is to figure out somewhere else to be. Lily made a small sound. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. I heard everything very clearly in the silence that followed. The refrigerator hum, the wind outside against the eaves, my own heartbeat, which was strange and too loud. I looked at Nathan one more time. He was still looking at the tablecloth. I said nothing. I pushed my chair back from the table slowly, the way my knees required now, and I stood, and I walked down the hallway to my bedroom, and I closed the door. I sat in the dark for a while. I didn't turn on the lamp. The streetlight outside came through the curtain edges and made a pale rectangle on the carpet, and I sat in the rocking chair Carol had brought from her mother's house, and I looked at that rectangle, and I listened to the muffled sounds from down the hall. Serena's voice. Lower now, Nathan's murmur. Then the television coming on, which told me everything I needed to know about how the evening would end. I sat there for 2 hours, maybe 3. At some point, I turned on the bedside lamp. Carol's photograph was on the nightstand, the one from our 25th anniversary trip to Vermont, her hair loose and her face tipped back slightly, laughing at something just outside the frame. I had looked at this photograph 10,000 times. Tonight, I looked at it differently. I asked her, quietly, whether I had done this, whether I had made myself so available that I had become invisible, whether there was a version of me that had seen this coming and looked away. I didn't have an answer, but I started to understand what I had to do. I went to my desk, pulled out the accordion file where I kept financial documents, found the co-signature agreement for Serena's business loan, the original, not a copy, because Frank had advised me to keep the original. Found the business loan statements from the past 2 years. Found my pension account summary, my savings account records, the deed to the house. I spread them across the desk under the lamp, and I did what I had done for 34 years when I needed to understand a structure. I looked at what was actually holding what up. The numbers were not what I had believed. The business loan had a remaining balance of $212,000. My co-signature made me fully liable. The loan was current, but if the hotel contract financing fell through, which was the precise situation Serena had been managing, a default was not impossible. I was standing under a building I had not examined in 2 years, and I had trusted the people who lived in it to tell me about the cracks. I found the statements I had stopped reading carefully. The one that showed that Nathan and Serena had refinanced the loan 8 months ago, extending the term and drawing an additional $40,000 in equity. Equity that existed in part because of my co-signature and my financial history. They had not mentioned this to me. I was a party to the loan. They had refinanced it without telling me. I sat very still for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and texted Frank Holloway. I knew he was awake. Frank was always awake on Christmas Eve, doing what he called the annual audit of his life choices. I wrote, I need to remove my co-signature from Serena's business loan. Tell me how and how fast. His response came in 4 minutes. Call me in the morning. It's possible if they have sufficient credit now. Let me pull the documents. Merry Christmas, Daniel. I looked at the green-papered box still sitting on the table in my mind. The $60,000 I had been prepared to give. I thought about what those $60,000 represented: 3 months of not asking for anything, of carrying the coffee cup to the sink carefully, of knocking before I entered any room in my own house, of making myself smaller, so that everyone in that house could expand. I put the documents back in the file, turned off the desk lamp, lay down on my bed without changing clothes, because I was 67 years old, and my daughter-in-law had just told me I was the problem with her marriage on Christmas Eve, and I had earned the right to sleep in my clothes, if I wanted to. I did not sleep for a long time, but I had stopped shaking by midnight, and I counted that as progress. Frank called at 8 in the morning. His voice carried the particular satisfaction of a man who had found a workable solution. The original loan terms require lender approval for co-signer removal, he said, but given that the business has 2 years of service payments and Serena's credit has likely improved, it's a legitimate request. I can file the petition this week. They may push back, they may not. Either way, you are on record as withdrawing consent. I'd also recommend you formally notify them in writing. Document everything. I asked him how long. 3 to 6 weeks for the lender to process. But the notification is immediate. The moment you file, you have established the record. What about the house? Frank paused. The house is yours, Daniel. It has always been yours. They are residents. They have no legal claim. I know that. I just needed to hear it from someone else. He understood. Good lawyers always understand the things that aren't really legal questions. I thanked him and hung up and sat in the kitchen with coffee. The kind I made strong and dark the way I had always made it. In my kitchen, at my kitchen table, in the house I had owned for 33 years. Nathan and Serena's door was still closed. Lily and Marcus were asleep in the rooms that had been guest rooms until they became their rooms, a transition I had watched happen without marking the moment it became permanent. I went to my desk, took out the legal pad, started writing. The first draft was too angry. The second was too detailed. I had the same experience as any man who has tried to explain his own wound to someone who inflicted it. There were too many things to say, and none of them would land where I wanted them to. The third draft was simple. I read it aloud to the empty study. Nathan and Serena. By the time you read this, I'll be on a plane. I have formally initiated the removal of my co-signature from the business loan. Frank Holloway has the documentation. You'll receive formal notice from the lender within the month. The house at 1147 Clearwater Drive remains in my name. You have 30 days to make other arrangements. I've attached the property deed and the co-signer withdrawal notice. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I have spent 4 years making myself smaller in a space that was mine, and last night I was told that even that wasn't small enough. You wanted me gone. I'm gone. The difference is that I'm choosing how and when and where. Don't call. I'll reach out when I'm ready. Daniel. I folded the letter, slid the documents in behind it, found a Christmas box in the hall, closet red, with a white lid, and placed everything inside. Set the lid on, carried it to the kitchen table, and put it precisely where the green box had sat the night before. Centered it, walked away. Then I opened my laptop and booked a flight to Kyoto. I had thought about Japan the way you think about something you always intended to do before the right moment passed. Carol and I had talked about it once, sitting on the back porch in July with iced tea and a travel magazine she'd found at the dentist's office. She had lingered over a photograph of Arashiyama at dawn, the bamboo grove in winter fog, and she had said, "Someday, Marsh." And I had said, "Someday." And someday had become the word we used for all the things we had not yet learned we were running out of time for. The flight left Portland at 7 in the morning on December 28th. 3 days. I had 3 days. I spent the first one quietly. Nathan knocked on my door in the afternoon, and I said I wasn't feeling well, and he accepted this with the relief of a man who is grateful not to have to confront something. Serena didn't knock. Lily knocked in the evening, and I opened the door because I couldn't not open it for Lily, and she looked at me with Carol's patience in her eyes and said, "Grandpa, are you okay?" And I told her I was going to be. She nodded like she already knew some version of what had happened, the way teenagers always know more than adults assume, and she hugged me before she went back to her room. Marcus texted me the next morning. It was just a meme, a photograph of a golden retriever looking very seriously at a document with the caption, "When Grandpa does the math." I stared at it for a full minute before I laughed, which surprised me, and I sent back a thumbs up. He responded with 3 fire emojis. I had no idea what that meant, but I chose to interpret it as support. I packed on December 27th. The suitcase was the same one Carol and I had bought for a conference trip to Boston in 2009, olive green canvas with brass buckles, impractical and reliable. I packed for cold weather. Kyoto in late December was 40 degrees and damp, and for walking, because I intended to walk until my legs stopped cooperating. I packed the paperback I had been meaning to read for 2 years, a novel about a Japanese man who had spent his career serving others and was trying, in his final years, to determine whether his life had meant what he had wanted it to mean. I had bought it before I understood why I needed it. The red Christmas box sat on the kitchen table, undisturbed, as I moved through the house in the early morning of December 28th. I paused in the living room doorway. The Christmas tree I had bought and decorated stood in the corner. The ornaments Carol and I had collected over 30 years, the glass angel from our first Christmas, the Oregon State ornament Nathan had made in 4th grade from air-dry clay, the small wooden bird from a trip to Vermont. I had hung them all by myself, the way I had for 6 years. Nobody had helped. Nobody had offered. I turned off the porch light. I picked up my suitcase. I left. The Uber driver to the airport was a man named Henry, 62, retired from the post office, making supplemental income in the mornings. We talked about the roads. He didn't ask about my trip, and I didn't explain it, and we arrived at PDX in a silence that suited us both. I tipped him well. He wished me safe travels with the sincerity of a man who meant it, and I carried my suitcase through the sliding doors into the terminal. Portland International at 5:30 in the morning was its own kind of world. Travelers moving with the particular focused haste of early departures. Families with too much luggage. Business travelers with no luggage at all. I checked my bag, went through security, found a seat near gate D12, and bought a coffee from a kiosk that cost more than any coffee reasonably should. My phone stayed in my pocket. I had changed the voicemail the night before. "You've reached Daniel Marsh. I'm traveling and unavailable. I'll contact you when I'm ready." The flight from Portland to Seattle was 40 minutes. The flight from Seattle to Tokyo was 10 hours. I had a window seat, economy, because I had not spent 40 years of careful saving on business class seating. I watched the Pacific emerge below the clouds, and I read my novel, and I ordered tomato juice at 30,000 feet because it seemed like the right thing to do, and I slept for 3 hours over water I had never crossed before. Tokyo was its own disorientation, enormous and precise, and moving at a frequency that made American airports feel loosely organized. I followed signs in kanji and English, found the bullet train, and sat in a seat so clean it seemed unlikely that other humans had used it, and I watched Japan slide past the window at 200 kilometers per hour. Farmland, then mountains, then the outskirts of Kyoto spreading into view. My hotel was a small ryokan near the Higashiyama district, selected because a travel website had described it as the kind of place that teaches you to be still. I had not known how much I needed to be still until I read that line. The room had a low table and a futon, and a narrow window that looked into a courtyard garden where a stone lantern stood in the frost. A woman in a blue kimono brought green tea without being asked, and set it on the table with a small bow, and left without saying anything unnecessary. I sat on the floor, which was harder to get down to at 67 than it would have been at 40, and I drank tea, and looked at the garden, and felt something I hadn't felt in so long, that I had stopped expecting to feel it. Quiet. Real quiet. Not the quiet of a house where conflict was being suppressed, but the quiet of a place where nothing was required of me. I sat there for a long time. The first full day, I walked. Higashiyama in the morning was everything the photographs promised, and something more: the stone lanes, the wooden storefronts, the occasional monk crossing a courtyard, with the unhurried movement of someone who has made peace with time. I walked up the path to Kiyomizu-dera Temple, the wooden platform extending over the hillside, the valley spreading below in winter gray and green. Other tourists clustered at the railing taking photographs. I stood apart from them and simply looked at the distance. Below the city, below the visible horizon, somewhere over the Pacific, Nathan was waking up to a red Christmas box on his kitchen table. I hoped Serena opened it first. I walked down the hill and found a small restaurant where I pointed at a photograph on the menu and received a bowl of ramen that tasted like something warm and patient. And I sat alone at a small wooden table and read 40 pages of my novel and paid the bill in yen that I had carefully organized in my wallet the night before, and I walked back to the ryokan in the late afternoon light, with my legs aching in a way that felt honest. On the second day I went to Arashiyama. The bamboo grove in winter was not what I expected. I had expected the famous photographs, the towering green corridor, the dappled light. What I found was something quieter and stranger. The bamboo in late December stood in pale gold, the light low and diffuse through the overcast, the sound of it in the wind, a dry rattling that was not unpleasant. Other tourists walked through quickly, photographing and moving on. I walked slowly. I stopped in the middle of the path. "Stood still, Carol," I said quietly, to no one in visible range. "We should have come here sooner." And then, because I was 67 years old and standing in a bamboo forest in Japan on the 4th day of the rest of my life, I allowed myself to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just the way grief actually works when you finally stop managing it quietly. In the chest, for a few minutes, while the bamboo rattled overhead and the other tourists moved around me politely. When I was finished, I wiped my face with my coat sleeve and kept walking. The days built a rhythm. Morning tea in the courtyard. Walking until my legs had opinions about it. Meals in small restaurants where I pointed and received good things. Afternoons in temples where the silence was held by centuries of practice rather than avoidance. Evenings in my room reading, or sitting at the low table with nothing, just looking at the stone lantern in the garden. On the 5th day, Lily texted me. I had kept my phone primarily as a camera. I had taken photographs of temples and food in the frost on the courtyard garden each morning. I had not checked messages. When I finally looked at the screen that afternoon, there were 11 voicemails from Serena, 6 from Nathan, and 1 text from Lily. I deleted the voicemails without listening to them. I opened Lily's text. Grandpa, I know you probably need your space and I'm not going to bother you. I just want you to know that what she said to you was wrong. It was wrong and I'm sorry you heard it. You built this whole life for us and I see it even if other people stopped seeing it. Please eat good food. Love, Lily. P.S. Marcus says hi, but he's too embarrassed to text you directly. I read it twice. Set the phone face down on the low table. Looked at the garden. Then I picked the phone back up and wrote back. Thank you for saying that. I'm eating very well. Japan is beautiful. I'll tell you about it when I'm ready. I love you, Lily. P.S. Tell Marcus the fire emojis were very helpful. I powered the phone back off. There was nothing in those voicemails I needed to hear yet. Whatever they said, the anger or the appeal or the complicated combination of both, I was not ready to receive it. For the first time in 4 years, the timing was mine. On the 8th day, I took the train to Nara. The deer wandered freely through the park, uninterested in human schedule or preference, taking crackers from outstretched hands with the calm entitlement of animals that have never been told they were in the way. I bought crackers from a vendor and held them out, and a deer walked up and took one with the particular dignity of someone accepting what was owed. I laughed, genuinely, the way I had not laughed in so long that it felt like using a muscle I had forgotten. I spent an afternoon at Todaiji Temple, the great bronze Buddha sitting in the wooden hall that was somehow both enormous and serene. I sat on a bench inside for nearly an hour. Other tourists came and went. I stayed. The priest who was attending the hall, an older man, perhaps my age, with a stillness that suggested long practice, caught my eye at one point and gave a small nod. I nodded back. We didn't speak. We were each in the presence of something larger than whatever had brought us there, and that was enough. On the last evening, I found a restaurant near my ryokan, a place with 10 seats, and a chef who stood behind a low counter and prepared each dish with the focused care of someone who has decided that doing one thing well is sufficient. I ordered what he recommended. I ate slowly. The meal lasted 2 hours, and I was grateful for every minute of it. I sat over the last of my tea and made a list in the notebook I had bought at a stationery shop on the 3rd day. Not a list of things to do. A list of what I actually wanted, which I had not asked myself since Carol was alive. Sell the house, or keep it and rent it, decide with Frank. Smaller place, something I can manage without managing other people's lives in the same rooms. Return to Japan in spring, when the cherry blossoms were what the photographs promised. Pick up my engineering licenses and find 2 or 3 consulting projects a year, the interesting ones, the ones I chose. Find a woodworking class. I had wanted to take one for 20 years and had never had the time, which was not a sentence I was willing to keep using. Reconnect with Lily and Marcus on my terms, when I was ready, in a context that didn't require me to be invisible to maintain it. I wrote one more line. Call Nathan when I'm ready. Not yet, but eventually. I looked at that line for a while. Then I kept it. The flight home was longer in the way that return trips always are, carrying more than departure. I read. I slept over the Pacific again, genuinely and fully, the way I had not slept in months. I woke over the Alaska coastline with the clarity that follows real rest, and looked at the white mountains below, and felt something that had been absent so long it took me a moment to identify it. Forward. I was looking forward. Portland in January was gray and serious, the way the Pacific Northwest is serious about winter. I took a taxi from the airport, the same choice as before, the same preference for anonymity. The driver was different this time. A young woman who played quiet music I didn't recognize and drove well, and I watched the city come together out the window the way you watch something familiar after you have been away long enough to see it fresh. We turned on to Clearwater Drive. The house appeared. The driveway was empty. I paid the driver, tipped well, and stood on the sidewalk with my suitcase for a moment. The porch light I had forgotten to turn off 16 days ago was still burning. The front walk had snow on it. We'd had a storm in my absence. I had seen it in the weather app and no one had shoveled it. I found my key. The door opened into stillness. The living room was empty in a way that made the air feel different. The couch they had brought from their previous apartment gone. The large television they had mounted on the wall I had asked them not to mount anything on gone. The bracket holes left in the drywall like punctuation. The rug that had been a wedding gift. The one Serena had always called hers gone. My recliner remained. Carol had given it to me for my 60th birthday, dark leather, slightly worn on the right armrest from years of use. It sat in the center of the empty room like a throne that had survived everything else. I walked through slowly. The kitchen, their table, gone. My small round table returned to its place by the window, the one Carol and I had eaten at before the house expanded to include everyone else. The red Christmas box was no longer on the table. They had opened it. On the counter, held flat by the pepper grinder, was a note in Serena's handwriting. I hope you're satisfied, Daniel. We gave you 4 years. We kept our end of the deal. You chose to blow everything up because I said one thing on a bad night. The kids are devastated. I hope whatever you're doing was worth it. I read it twice, set it back down. Then I opened the kitchen drawer, found the notepad, and wrote underneath her words in my own handwriting. I chose to stop. There is a difference. I folded both pages together and put them in the kitchen recycling bin. Not the trash. The recycling. Some things deserve to become something else. I walked through the rest of the house. Nathan and Serena's room stripped. The closet empty. The carpet bearing the ghost rectangles of furniture that had stood in place for 4 years. Marcus's room bare walls where his posters had been. A soccer cleat left under the radiator, forgotten or abandoned. Lily's room emptied carefully. She had always been careful. Except for one thing left on the windowsill deliberately. A small piece of sea glass. Pale green, the kind you find on Oregon beaches. She had collected them since she was small. She had left one for me. I picked it up and held it in my palm. It was smooth and cool and exactly the weight of something that mattered. I called Frank from the kitchen while the coffee brewed. He answered on the 3rd ring, and his voice had the particular warmth of a man who has been waiting to hear how something turned out. Daniel, how was Japan? Better than I expected. They're gone. Yeah, Nathan called me. 3 times, actually. He's not happy about the loan situation. The lender approved your removal, by the way. Finalized 2 days ago. You're clear. How is that possible? I expected them to fight it. Serena's credit had improved more than I expected. She qualified on her own merits. The business is actually doing well. They didn't need you anymore. They just hadn't told you that. I stood in my kitchen and absorbed that. They didn't need me anymore, and they hadn't told me. Of course they hadn't. I was more useful to them as a cosigner than I was as a person. The moment I was no longer necessary financially, I had become, what had Serena said, a presence in every room, a coffee cup on the wrong surface, a pair of eyes that made her feel watched. Frank, I said, what's my house actually worth right now? He named a figure that made me sit down. I spent the rest of that first afternoon walking through the rooms with a different eye. Not grief, not inventory. Assessment. The kind of clear-eyed measurement I had done professionally for 34 years. What needed repair? What was worth keeping? What could become something else? The house had good bones. Carol had always said that about houses she loved. Good bones. It was true of this one. The structure was sound, the rooms proportioned generously, the yard established and mature. Someone would love this house. It didn't have to be me anymore. I called the realtor the following morning. That evening I sat in my recliner in the empty living room with Carol's photograph, which I had moved back to the bookshelf, and a glass of good whiskey, and I looked at the space around me. The bare walls, the bare floor, the windows showing January dark, and the neighbor's light through the trees. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in 4 years. I had stopped bleeding to fill a room, and now the room was empty, and I found that I did not miss the bleeding at all. There is a particular peace in understanding, finally, what you cost. Not in terms of money. I had always known those numbers. But what you cost, in terms of the self you set aside. The things you didn't say. The rooms you moved through quietly so as not to disturb. The $60,000 you almost gave to someone who was already planning, in some corner of herself, how to tell you that you were the problem. I poured a little more whiskey, looked at Carol's photograph. She was laughing at something outside the frame. I had spent 6 years wondering what it was. Standing in that empty room, I decided it didn't matter. What mattered was that she had been laughing. What mattered was that I could still see it completely. I texted Lily the next morning. I'm home. When you're ready, I'd like to have lunch. Just you and Marcus. Somewhere you choose. No pressure, no timeline. Just lunch. Her reply came in under a minute. Yes. Obviously yes. Saturday? Saturday? I wrote back. I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the neighbor's dog investigate the snow in the yard next door, with the thorough joy of something encountering the world exactly as it is. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of January clarity that sometimes arrives in Oregon between storms, and the light was coming through the window at an angle that hit the floor in a long rectangle. Warm despite the season. I was 67 years old. My name was on the deed. My name was off the loan. My recliner was in the center of a room that was going to become someone else's story, and I was going to find out what mine looked like without anyone else's weight in it. I had not forgiven Serena. I was not sure I would. Some doors, once they show you what they're built from, do not invite you to walk back through them. Nathan was a different question, longer and more complicated, the kind of structural problem that required more time and different tools. I would get there. I had always been patient with things that were worth the patience. Lily and Marcus were worth anything. The rest I would figure out the way I had always figured out hard things carefully, with the right instruments, and without rushing the assessment. I finished my coffee, set the mug in the sink, went to the study, and opened my laptop to the Japan Airlines website. Because spring was coming, and the cherry blossoms were a thing that existed in the world, and I had made a promise to myself in a Kyoto restaurant over very good tea, and I had learned, finally and completely, and at some cost, that promises made to yourself were the ones you could not afford to break. I selected the dates. I entered my credit card number. I clicked confirm. The booking page thanked me and wished me a pleasant journey. I already knew I would have one.